Morant is back. Well, kind of. Not really. Not fully just yet. But he's back in the Grizzlies facility, Damichael. That has to count for something. And between his impending return and the crazy weekend that the Memphis Grizzlies had, we're going to have to make this a special episode of Locked On Grizzlies. We're going to flip the script Missy Elliott style. We're going to Quentin Tarantino this thing, start at the end and work our way backwards towards the beginning. It'll all make sense. Stick with Damichael and I. It's Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hopefully you had a wonderful weekend, but it is a Monday. It is a work day, and we are back at work here on Locked On Grizzlies. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax. Thank you so much for being with me, and I get to say once again, being with us, because the incomparable Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, beat writer for the Memphis Grizzlies, also my wonderful co-host, is joining me on this episode. Damichael, how are you doing?
I'm great, Joe. I'm great. Another great week coming up to talk about some Grizzlies basketball. We have a lot of things to talk about, but more than anything, some home cooking here now. You know, we talk about all the road stuff, but now the Grizzlies have a chance to just sit in their own beds, play where they have the best record in the NBA, and that's in the FedEx Forum. All week long, pretty much up until Sunday. So pretty much all Locked On Grizzlies this week will be talking from the perspective of the Grizzlies playing on their home floor. So it should be a lot of good things. It should be a lot of good things because it's just not too much bad from this team on the road.
And our episode for St. Patrick's Day, talking about the luck of the Grizzlies turning, was pretty on the spot on. Michael. Not many other people are going to do it, but look at this. Look, what am I doing? I'm patting myself on the back. I'm not just showing off my terrible receding hairline. Patting myself on the back because we nailed that one, Damichael. If I was there, I would pat your back. I would go and just, gently tap you on your back as well. But before we get, sued or go too far, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can receive a 100% match on an instant deposit up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are also over on Locked On Grizzlies is also on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. However you get your podcasts. If you like watching them over on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, we love interacting with the commenters, or at least I do. Sometimes you like me. Sometimes I make you mad. Sometimes I say not so nice things, and I need to get better at that. But, I can be a little bit edgy, especially when I don't get enough sleep. That's a me thing. That's not a you thing. That's a me thing. So I'll keep getting better, keep making us better as a show. Damichael's perfect as a person, but keep making us better as a show over at YouTube. And
I appreciate the compliment.
I'm going to keep loving you up, Damichael. I always will. So, like I said in the start of the program, we're going to, because of all the stuff that happened, right? It feels like the largest comeback in Grizzlies franchise history happened a year ago. So much has transpired. We're going to start at the end, which is today, and work our way backwards. We're going to Tarantino this thing, Missy Elliott, like however you want, whichever pop culture reference you like, that's what we're going with. And we're going to start with today and Ja Morant's return to the Memphis Grizzlies facility, right? He's not going to play against the Dallas Mavericks, but he is back in the mix. Damichael, not to put you on the spot, we weren't able to talk about this too much before recording. Any idea what that's going to look like? Is he going to be on the bench on Monday night? Is he just going to do shoot around or, get a simulated practice in? How do we anticipate this Monday going? Because outside of the reality of him just not playing, we don't know exactly what this potential media circus is going to involve. And then, of course, the Dallas Mavericks are coming to play, and they've got some stuff going on as well.
Yeah, so let's start with what we already know here, Joe. What we know is the Grizzlies are going to put Ja Morant through a ramp-up period with hopes of, they'll see how he progresses throughout the week. And there's the possibility that he plays Wednesday. If not Wednesday, he'll play Friday. That's what we know for sure. How does that process look is where we are on Monday. So the Grizzlies aren't having a morning shoot-around. Mm-hmm. So since they're not having shoot-around, people say, well, how's Ja going to get some work in? Well, you got to remember, Ja has access to the facilities now, and just because the Grizzlies aren't having quote-unquote organized shoot-around, certain players still can. I believe a shoot-around is classified as more than 5 players, or it's a certain number of players have to be, available at a certain time. But I'm pretty sure, with the Grizzlies, how much, they really want to get Ja Morant back and going here. So he'll get some work in. Even though the team won't quote unquote have a shoot around tomorrow, he'll probably do some individual things, some ramp up things on Monday, Tuesday, and then all that geared towards let's see how he's doing Wednesday. But that's kind of been the plan here all along, and it sounds like he's going to debut later this week. But the Grizzlies, of course, you want to be careful, right, Joe? Because we all know soft tissue injuries are begging to happen if you rush someone back in this type of situation.
And you don't want that by any stretch of the imagination. So I think the thing that makes the most sense, at least to me, Damichael, and at least in terms of our schedule, because I don't know if you have been paying attention or not, dear Locked On Grizzlies listener or viewer. Damichael and I have been very good this month. We have literally been your team each and every day. But Damichael and I, we circled Friday on the calendar because do you really want to hear us talk about the Houston Rockets twice in a row? I'm not going to speak for all of our listeners and viewers. I don't know that I want to talk about the Houston Rockets twice in a row. But you know what we're going to have to do, Damichael? If that's the game that Ja comes back, we're going to have to talk about the Houston Rockets twice in a row. So selfishly, I'm cheering for a Wednesday return. But again, you're exactly right. The idea of Morant getting injured as part of this process, not ideal in any way, shape, or form. They're going to do exactly what they need to do in the best interest of him. And again, I guess what I am most interested in, and again, this is kind of unprecedented, right? Obviously, things like this have happened in NBA history before, but not to the Memphis Grizzlies. So is Morant on the bench? How much does he interact with the other guys? Is he a coach on the floor? Are they just going to keep him out? Because technically, since he's out, he doesn't have to interact with media. He doesn't really have to be there. So what will that look like? Will he, really just be hungry to get back around the guys? I'm kind of curious how that's going to look. And again, on the grander scale of the game itself, Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, and Morris, Markieff. I always mix them up. Is it Marcus or Markieff?
This is Markieff.
Markieff. Yeah. Markieff is because Marcus is still with the Clippers, I believe. But anyway, one of the Morris brothers and Kyrie and Luka are all questionable for the game. So it's a 50-50, and that's an upgrade for Luka, I believe. So it's possible that Doncic plays in this one, but it's also possible he doesn't. That's interesting just in terms of actually trying to win the game. But again, the fact that Ja Morant is now eligible to be back around the team, how around the team he is something that I'm really kind of curious about because these are uncharted waters for this Grizzlies organization.
Yeah, and Ja won't speak to the media on Monday. So wanted to make that clear as well. We won't hear, unless he comes up to me and says something or something like that. But, nothing is scheduled.
He's not obligated because he is on the injury report as out.
Exactly. He's not obligated. So because of that, you have, the Ja Morant factor. But as you just mentioned, the Mavs have a few guys on the injury report as well who are pretty good players. And the Grizzlies have another guy who you can make a strong argument has been the best player for the Grizzlies while Ja Morant's been out, and that's Jaren Jackson Jr. He's questionable due to left calf soreness. Kyrie Irving, Luka, and Markieff Morris. I mean, look, no disrespect to Markieff Morris. Great career so far to this point, but I'm focusing on Kyrie and Luka. I mean, it was just a week ago where Markieff sent out like one of those, those subtle tweets that made it look like he was complaining about playing time, but maybe that wasn't. But that's how a lot of people, as I was looking, following the Mavs, contingency over there, seeing what people were saying, and the fans sound like he was complaining. But with that being said, Luka practiced last week full for the first time. I believe it was on Thursday or Friday. He got his first full practice. He didn't play the following game. So things are trending towards Luka playing. He had a full practice. So You might get to see Luka here. I believe Kyrie played in the last game. He's just back on the injury report, so I'm pretty sure that's probably a precautionary measure. So it sounds like both of those guys are trending towards playing. With Jaren Jackson Jr., of course, you got to follow us throughout the day. You see our Twitter handles right down there. I'm going to be talking to Taylor before the game, and we'll get an update on Jaren Jackson Jr. right now. Of course, left calf soreness, as we've talked about throughout this season, Joe. A lot of Grizzlies players have come up as having quote unquote, soreness. Not saying it isn't soreness, but I said it like that because we've seen it more this season than in years past. And Taylor Jenkins, and talking to him, he has made it very clear that the Grizzlies are playing the long game. Anything that's small, they do not want it to turn into something long. And the goal is to be as healthy as possible come postseason. That this probably, listing Jaren Jackson Jr. on the injury report is definitely an indication of that. So we'll see, what his status is up close, maybe a couple hours before the game. But just from what I've gathered so far, it seems like those other couple guys, Luka and Kyrie, are trending in the right direction.
Yeah, there's a difference in questionable between Kyrie, like you said, played recently, Luka ramping up practices, and then Jaren coming off of a back-to-back where he was pretty significant in both games.
Oh, yeah.
He probably is a little bit sore. So I guess to your point, I'm agreeing with you. Jaren seems to be scaling back a bit, whereas Kyrie and Luka seem to be accelerating. Now, the one thing I will say, we mentioned a moment ago, it's 2 games against the Rockets after this one. No disrespect to the Houston Rockets. But if Kyrie and Luka do play, maybe this is one that if Jaren is able to, you play through it a bit, and then maybe he could take Wednesday off. Again, no disrespect to the Houston Rockets, who have been playing better lately, in fairness to them. They had a pretty explosive offensive output recently. So not to say that they aren't capable of beating the Grizzlies, but as my partner said, literally one of, if not the best home teams in the entire NBA this season has been the Memphis Grizzlies. Against the Houston Rockets, I would take those odds. So we'll see how it plays out, obviously, going into tonight's game. But coming up next on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to, again, hit rewind a little bit. We're going to go back to Golden State, Memphis, and have a look at Dillon Brooks and all the craziness from a wild Saturday night there in Memphis, Tennessee. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by PrizePicks. In the game tonight, assuming Desmond Bane, obviously not on the injury report, plays, I would take Desmond Bane to score more than 21.5 points. I think I would take Luke Kennard to make more than 2.5 threes. The cool thing about PrizePicks is you can do that with a variety of different stat categories, playing not against other people, just against the projections available. Again, you pick 2 to 6 players. You can win up to 25 times your money on any given entry. You can do it for the NBA. You can do it for the NHL. You can do it for almost any sport under the sun. It's that easy at PrizePicks. Picks made in 30 seconds or less, or 60 seconds or less, excuse me. It's that easy with safe and fast withdrawals, and they are currently operational in over 30 states as well as Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are breaking down Grizzlies Warriors. Stick around. Stay with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax, joined by the wonderful Damichael Cole, the commercial appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. I am a Grizzlies columnist for Bluff City Media. I also write for SB Nation and Fansided. Check out my latest over at SB Nation. I can't trash them too much for letting GBB go because they still give me paychecks. About the Sacramento Kings. I want the Grizzlies to kind of rediscover their personal organizational joy the way the Kings have it. In terms of the vibes being immaculate, you can't really say that about Memphis anymore. But you can certainly say that about the Sacramento Kings in the here and now. So go check that out over at SB Nation. I also have a piece about Ja Morant returning to the Grizzlies live on Bluff City Media. So lots of areas to check out both Damichael and I in terms of our work. I'd say we're 2 of the hardest working guys in Grizzlies media. But toot my own horn. I'm going to, wait, hold on.
Pat yourself on the back again.
Pat myself on the back again. There you go. Okay. So Grizzlies Warriors, you were there in the building, completely nuts. Luke Kennard goes off. I text you to give you a hard time because you gave me a hard time about Luke Kennard last week. So I text you. I'm texting Parker Fleming, our friend that I know you interact with the game some. I'm fired up because Kennard's going off. Dillon Brooks is having a great game. Klay Thompson is throwing up four fingers like he's Ric Flair or J.J. Dillon from the Four Horsemen. He's doing all sorts of different stuff. A crazy game to be at, I'm sure. It was crazy to watch on TV. What was it like seeing Dillon Brooks just go completely nuclear, in addition to actual Luke Kennard going nuclear? There is a lot of energy coming out of FedEx Forum on Saturday night.
This was probably the most theatrical game we've seen from Dillon Brooks.
And that's a great way to describe it. That's a great way to describe it.
That's saying something. We've seen Dillon Brooks. He's been a character for some years. He's been a character since college. And even talking to Tyus Jones after that Golden State game, he was telling me about the old USA versus Canada games, right? When Tyus was coming up, when Dillon, those two came up around the same time. And he basically was, I asked him, I said, you didn't like Dillon then, did you? He said, no, I didn't. But he said, when he's on your team, you love him. When he's on the other side, you don't like him. And I saw someone say during that game against Golden State, basically, man, I'm enjoying what Dillon's doing. But if he was on the opposite team, I'd be infuriated right now. I mean, every 3-point shot he made, it was something new. It was yelling in front of Draymond. It was the mug he did in front of Klay Thompson. It was when he galloped up the court one time right behind Steph Curry. And one time he ran full speed yelling. He yelled boom as he was going towards Steph Curry. He's just going boom, boom. And Curry is just like ignoring him like he's like a 3-4-year-old kid who just won't stop complaining or something. Like Curry's just looking the other way and he's talking to Curry. And this was the funniest thing to me that I know the cameras didn't catch much. Dillon Brooks he has that game within the game thing down to a T, Joe. So check this out. During the game, Steph Curry, Dillon Brooks is a physical guy. Steph Curry has become much more physical. That's why he's, so great. But Dillon Brooks' physicality is different from, the typical guy. Dillon Brooks,
different frame,
he's gonna bump you and let you know. Dillon Brooks, even after halftime, when he walked up beside Steph Curry, you think he just walked beside him and just stood beside him? No, he did a nice little boom. Like I'm right here. Yep, it's me again. But every time Steph Curry, after a play, whistles dead, Steph will go up and say, hey, he's doing this with his elbow, he's doing that. And then Dillon will go right up to the referee too and say, hey, watch the push off, watch the push. He had a counter. Every time Steph complained about something, Joe, Dillon Brooks had a counter each time. And it was just hilarious to watch. But getting to the on-the-court stuff, he's been really good. I'm sure we'll talk about the San Antonio performance a little bit later. But 4 for 4 3-point range. One of my favorite stats with the Grizzlies, I've shared it a couple times now. Memphis, over the last 2 seasons, 22-1 when Dillon Brooks shoots 50% or better from the field. I saw some people say, well, that's saying something that he's only shot 50% in 23 games over the last 2 seasons. Well, look, I agree. But in his defense, remember Dillon Brooks only played 32 games last season. So let's say that in his defense. You're basically calculating, a full season's worth, 90-something games here. But 22-1 record. And not just a 22-1 record, Joe. 20 of those are by double digits. It's simple. When Dillon Brooks plays efficient on the offensive end, they blow teams out the roof. It's not even a close game. The one loss was to Utah earlier this season by 1 point in a game Ja didn't play, in a game where Utah made, I think, 18 or 19 3-pointers. That's what it's going to take. If Dillon Brooks is shooting 50% from the field, that's what it takes to beat Memphis. So the guy is one of the biggest keys to the long-term goals of this team.
Pretty significant. And in that game in general, Jaren Jackson Jr. was amazing. We'll talk more about him here in our final segment as well. Xavier Tillman had a double-double. Tyus Jones, 14 assists and not a single turnover. That is just, I've talked a lot recently in my arguments for Luke Kennard about guys with elite NBA skills, right? Like Luke Kennard has an elite NBA skill. So does Tyus Jones. Tyus Jones is elite when it comes to assist-to-turnover ratio. There are few in the NBA that are better at it than him. He had an awesome game. Xavier Tillman, like I said, with the double-double. Dillon, you mentioned, had a great showing. Desmond Bane kept it going. In fact, those 5 starters, plus Luke Kennard and David Roddy, were all pretty big pluses in the game. Santi Aldama's struggles continued to an extent. Other guys didn't play as well, but when the starters and Kennard and Roddy are playing that well, it's going to be really hard for a lot of teams, even with Morant out, even with Steven Adams out and Brandon Clark. Those 7 guys played pretty lights out throughout that game, and it was a lot of fun to watch. That was not the case in San Antonio, right? In the San Antonio game, as fun as the Grizzlies-Warriors game was, especially in the fourth quarter, because it was a competitive game against Golden State until the fourth quarter. Then Memphis poured it on. It was not a competitive game in the first half for the Memphis Grizzlies in San Antonio. They embarrassed themselves, to be honest with you. And then a funny thing happened. They woke up and started playing basketball, and they completed the largest comeback in the NBA this season and for the Memphis Grizzlies franchise ever. We'll talk about Grizzlies San Antonio from Friday night next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Nissan and the Nissan Ariya. Our Nissan Ariya Player of the Week is, of course, once again, Jaren Jackson Jr., our most electric player of the week. He is just dominant right now. I've called him Giannis Light multiple times, and it's not hyperbole at this moment. He's playing at a pretty Giannis Antetokounmpo-esque level. Extremely electric in terms of how he is getting to the basket, maintaining his defensive composure. He's really powerful at the rim. It's pretty impressive to see in terms of how he plays the game so brilliantly. And he plays it that well on both ends of the floor. And that's similar to the Nissan Ariya in that way. They both deliver on duality, combining both offense and defense in the case of Jaren, in the case of the Nissan Ariya, combining the power of a traditional car with the intelligence of an electric vehicle. The all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya, the EV for people who love to drive. Shop now at nissanusa.com. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by everybody's favorite protein bar, snack bar. That is Built Bar. And Built Bar madness is happening right now. I know you've got a favorite bar or puff. I had the coconut marshmallow puff recently, and I got to tell you, it was fantastic. It's time to make your bar's favorite flavor count by going to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorites. I'm voting for that coconut marshmallow. I've got a couple more I got to try, but that's the best one I've had so far. If you want the Grizzlies to win, then you'll be voting for that bar too. Support your team, support your bar or puff. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You've got to try it. They're delicious. They're healthy, low in sugar, covered in 100% real chocolate, high on protein as well. Run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. We're talking Grizzlies Spurs to close out this Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Joe Mullinax, joined by the wonderful Damichael, my co-host of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis. I, of course, of Bluff City Media. And Damichael, we've talked, again, we're Tarantino, Missy Elliott, however you want to reference. We've talked about Ja Morant and the Mavericks tonight. We've talked about the Warriors game and the amazing environment from Saturday night. Less interesting and exciting, at least in the first half, against the Spurs on Friday night. Memphis was down by as many as 29 points. And then they stormed back behind Kenneth Lofton Jr., who I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit here in this segment. Luke Kennard also had a very strong third quarter showing, the brilliance of Jaren Jackson Jr., and on a night where they honored his father. I thought that was pretty cool to see. The Grizzlies force overtime, and then in overtime they win. So the largest comeback in the NBA this season, the largest comeback in Memphis Grizzlies history. Earlier on in the show, I talked about the Sacramento Kings and the immaculate vibes and how they've kind of stolen that from what the Grizzlies were last season. seeing them make that comeback, seeing them celebrate and react the way that they did afterwards, Damichael, that was the first time in a long time that I felt like them getting back to who they are in terms of just enjoying playing together. And, Tyus Jones, who had a really strong game against the Spurs as well, I think a triple-double for him.
Yeah, first career
triple-double. He said in the post-game comments that they had some pretty frank halftime conversations, and that really stood out in my memory, Damichael. Maybe this was a leadership moment where they said enough is enough. Maybe we're looking back on this period, that game, as the time where the Grizzlies turned this thing around. Obviously, they could lose to the Mavericks, struggle against the Rockets. Anything's possible given the current state of affairs. But that comeback, whenever you do something that's never happened in franchise history, that is worthy of noting. And it's notable, especially because Tyus came out and said, oh, yeah, some words were said, and they had to be.
That's the game. That's the game we're going to point back to. I wholeheartedly believe that. So many reasons. I mean, starting with what you just said, Tyus Jones, gave us a touch of what went on in the locker room and learned a little bit more. Taylor Jenkins, basically, he didn't usually at halftime, they're watching film and all that. No, didn't watch film at this halftime. Taylor Jenkins goes in the locker room and he basically tells them, what do you have for me? He doesn't have much to say. You know Taylor Jenkins, he can talk for a while. He didn't have much to say, Joe. And at that point, 4 or 5 players stood up, as pretty much Tyus Jones said. They had honest conversations. And as Tyus Jones, I think, was the player who said that this is something that wouldn't have happened earlier in the season. It was important. It was important. And another thing was important. I love to watch when this team kind of, not only do they share the ball, but you can see why, the depth of this team really, shines at times. Tyus Jones, triple-double in this game. Desmond Bane was basically invincible for 3/4 of this game. And you can make an argument he was invincible for the whole regulation period through 4 quarters. Guess who scored the first 8 Grizzlies points of overtime? Desmond Bane came out of nowhere. First 8 points. The Spurs couldn't stop him in overtime. Dillon Brooks made arguably the 2 biggest shots of the game. He made a shot with about 1.8 seconds left, 3-pointer in the corner where they left them open. We've talked about teams leaving Dillon open lately. He made the Spurs pay. Made that shot, and then the Grizzlies were up 121-120 in overtime. Made the dagger then to put the Spurs away. So the 2 biggest shots, Jaren Jackson Jr., that's just Mr. Consistent. That's your leading scorer, your defensive monster. He's just, as we said earlier, he's been the guy, carrying things lately. But Kenneth Lofton Jr., you mentioned him, right? How about that for a surprise? I believe he had 11 points, knocked down a big 3-pointer in the third quarter there. He got that offensive rebound, right? We talk about how this guy, that big round center, low center of gravity, moving guys out of the way, Joe, and got the rebound, put it back up. And I know some people, want to know what's next for Kenneth Lofton Jr. And I'll stop here basically by saying, hey, look, don't expect him to be a regular in the rotation. No. I know that performance was real encouraging, right? And some people probably, well, why didn't he play against Golden State? It's 2 completely different teams. And, it was a back-to-back for one. And not only that, but 2 completely different teams. So you're going against Golden State. A lot more screen setting means you're going to have him, involved more in those screening roles and having to match up against Curry and Clay and Jordan Poole and those type of guys. And that's kind of the reason Kenneth Lofton Jr. hasn't played as much yet. That's the next level of development that's going to get him on the full time. And besides all that, Joe, he's on a 2-way contract. So while he's on a 2-way contract, he's ineligible for the postseason. So even if you can probably attribute to this as a coach. Yeah, you might love him and you want to play him. Shoot, he might be playing so good that he deserves starting minutes. Not saying that he is, but even if he was in that case, you won't have him for the postseason. You got to prepare. You got to have it in the back of your mind. This team is playing for the postseason, and he's not going to be able to play then. So, you don't want to lean too much on him at this point, which sucks to say, but that's the reality of all the things that go into this decision-making. But overall, Joe, a lot of guys stepped up in that Spurs game for a historic comeback.
Spoiler alert, I'm not going to go down the schedule here, but you're going to see a lot of Kenneth Lofton Jr. against the Houston Rockets, against the Orlando Magic.
Oh yeah. He's going to get some playing time.
You mentioned this earlier in the show, Damichael. Taylor Jenkins is still very aware of minutes and how many they're playing and not allowing small things to become big things. I personally would not be surprised if Jaren says, you know what, it's a little bit tight, but I'm okay. I can go on Monday. And then Kenneth Lofton Jr. starting on Wednesday.
Oh,
I'm being a bit superfluous because, again, John Morant might be starting on Wednesday. And, maybe Friday isn't just a day off potentially for you and I. It's a day off for everybody not named John Morant. But I think that you hit on something important there, the understanding of postseason preparations, which is one of the reasons I don't think that they're going to wait too long to get Morant back in the fold. He might not log 36 minutes against Houston on Wednesday, but I would be stunned if he didn't play Wednesday, at least some, because they need to start thinking that way. They need to get as many reps, as many minutes as possible, figure out what that postseason rotation is going to look like, because maybe they're the 2 seed, maybe they're the 3 seed, maybe they're the 4 seed. Hey, the Denver Nuggets have cooled off a little bit, Damichael. If Memphis can stay hot, it's unlikely because the Kings are hotter than the Grizzlies right now. But, my point is it's almost a certainty that they will be having home court advantage in that first round series. It's very unlikely they fall beyond 4. And at this point, it's unlikely they fall beyond 3. I think that the thing for Memphis is, what is that postseason rotation going to look like? What is Steven Adams going to be if and when he returns? How do you get John Morant back in the mix? That was something that I talk about with Parker Fleming on a future episode of Grizzly Bear Blues Live. How do you reintroduce John Morant to this lineup? To me, it involves Tyus Jones and getting him to continue to be the 14 assist, 0 turnover guy on a much smaller rotation, 14 or so minutes a game, because Morant's back. So there's lots of layers to that. And I think that what you saw in the Spurs game was a realization of what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable. You saw guys like Luke Kennard get more comfortable. I joke and give hard times about Luke Kennard. He had a terrible closeout defensively in that game that Matt Hardlicka tweeted about, and I included it in an article. Exactly. I mean, it was really bad. Like, there's no real excuse to make for it. But he has a need to get used to the schemes that are being run. And the only way to do that is through actually physically playing. So you saw Kennard, both in the Warriors game and in the Spurs game, get some run. You saw him get hot. You saw him show that elite 3-point shooting skill, but he also did some sneaky rebounding things. He also, you mentioned that Dillon Brooks 3 that was made to send it to overtime. One of the reasons that Brooks was wide open was they were collapsing on Kennard because he is the elite 3-point shooter, leaving Dillon open, and it was an assisted bucket for Luke Kennard. So I think that you're going to continue to see those pieces kind of mesh and intermingle, and hopefully that process continues tonight against Dallas, and then obviously later on in the week against the Rockets, as John Morant, assuming Morant gets back into the Grizzlies fold. So it's going to be an interesting week, a fun week for the Grizzlies. Make sure you're sticking with us here on Locked On Grizzlies as we progress through a pretty important week in Grizzlies life. And, 2 games against the Rockets, you usually wouldn't say that, but John Morant's return makes it that. Again, I feel like we're trashing the Rockets. I'm sorry, Locked On.
You're trashing the Rockets.
Yeah, thank you for. You're exactly right. That's exactly fair.
I know how to make these next couple games fun, Joe. And the way is, look at the Kings schedule. Look, take a look over at that Kings schedule coming up. You see, the Grizzlies are playing the Rockets, but this is the perfect time to do a little scoreboard watching, Joe.
Absolutely.
They got some games coming up, and I think one of those is against the Boston Celtics, even though it's at home. They got
in the NBA.
They're on the road against the Utah Jazz. They
got an easy place to play.
Yeah, you get the Suns at home. That's their next 3 games. Look out now. Look out. This might be the time where we can say the Grizzlies may create a little cushion, but that's how you make this week interesting.
I like that, Damichael. I like where your head's at. Thanks for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. Now make your second listen Game to Game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. The next time we are here, it'll be a Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. We'll cover whatever happened with Ja Morant, whether he was there in the arena, whether he came and got some work in before the game and then left. However they handle it, we'll break that down, as well as Grizzlies Mavericks, looking ahead to a busy week for the Kings and a less busy week, at least in theory, for the Grizzlies, and how they can take advantage of this, just like Damichael kind of outlined. All that coming up on our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for making us part of your NBA and Grizzlies content experience. Continue to rate, review, most importantly, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, as well as over on YouTube. You can like and comment over there as well. Make sure you're following Damichael on Twitter. He's a fantastic follow. I am not as good of a follow, but if you want opportunities to yell at me in multiple platforms, by all means, at Joe Mullinax. He's at Damichael C. Until tomorrow, enjoy your Monday. Stay locked in. This is Locked On Grizzlies. Have a good one. We'll see you soon.